very complicated. And by the way, I passed out a couple of pages here about the bill itself, but I'm going to read to you my summary real quickly. The Certified Company Program is a powerful economic development tool that allows a state to generate a pool of investment capital that is managed by private sector professional venture capitalists. The capital is exclusively for investment in small companies in the state. The purpose of the CAPCO program is to provide long-term equity capital for new and expanding small businesses, stimulate the creation of high-wage jobs, create and foster a local venture capital infrastructure within the state, and produce an incentive to attract out-of-state companies. And where this came about, sir, real quickly, is we met with some guys with the National Urban League in Washington that suggested that we may want to try this in Georgia, and it may take a year or two to do it, and that's what I'm asking you to do today, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Are there any questions for the author of this legislation from members of the committee? Any questions? Who's that 19? Is that none? Okay, seeing none, we're going to assign that to our Public Finance and Policy Subcommittee, and we look forward to a spirited debate on that issue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Mr. Secretary, House Bill 486, please.
HB 486, I represent Willard of the 49th to amend Code Section 485, 359.1 of the Fish Code of Georgia Annotated related to contracts with county tax commissioners.
I should recognize the distinguished chairman of our Judiciary Committee, Chairman Willard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This has come about as a result of some information that came to light during this past year that really kind of surprised and almost say floored me. That we have a provision in the law, and let me give you a background. You have, of course, tax commissioners in every county. In most of the instances, I got a list here because I had Michelle Nesmith with the ACCG did a great job of doing some research for me at my request. A lot of the counties do work with the cities, and you have intergovernmental agreements between the county, the city, and the tax commissioner. And that is the means by which the work is done, and if there's something to be done as far as a supplement to the tax commissioner, it is done through the county recognition and paying that supplement. We've got a provision, though, in the law, Mr. Chairman, that allows the tax commissioner to contract directly with the city. And we have a number of instances, I think it's about 19 of them around the state, where you'll have a contract between the city and the county to which the tax commissioner may be a party. Then they walk out of the room, the tax commissioner says, and now you got to make an agreement with me. And I think it's a poor policy, first of all, to have this. You should have an agreement. In fact, there's, I'll say the most egregious of the circumstances is that one county where a tax commissioner is receiving, his salary is $109,000, and I know he's receiving about $175,000 in compensation in this matter. And I think there's a policy flaw that leaves something open like that. Now, that's the most egregious. There's probably about somewhere over $300,000 being paid in this manner. And I don't fault the tax commissioners getting additional funds for what may be additional work. I fault the policy of leaving it open and allowing them to do this directly with the city when they're working, their staff and their operation, their whole resources comes as a matter of county resources and not personal resources. So what we've got here, I think, left open a little bit of a fee system with the way this law is set up, and I think we need to look at it from a policy standpoint, and if it's not the right way to have it done, try to close that matter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are there any questions? Chair recognizes Chairman Williams. What number are you there?
23, Mr. Chairman.
You're on.
Representative Willard, on this retaining the compensation, is this personally or does it go to the tax office?
It's personal. It's personal payment.
Now, how much of this stuff does he do personally?
Well, there may be some, increase of duties on the part of that individual tax commissioner, but I'm saying that's a part of the problem. That needs to be worked out between him and the county as far as compensation. I'll say Whitfield County is one of the counties. We've just gone through that. Yeah, we've just gone through it. Whitfield County is one of those that does that with their one city up there, and it accounts for about $18,000 directly to the tax commissioner.
Okay.
Further inquiry of the author of this legislation? Chair seeing none, Chairman Willard, we're going to assign this to our ad valorem tax committee, subcommittee, and we expect to a spirited debate on this legislation. Thank you, sir. Remember, I want to remind the members, too, when you're recognized to speak, pull those microphones a little closer to you. I don't think it's going to pick it up, and the folks that broadcast this over the Internet have told us they're not picking up the voice as well. Mr. Secretary, House Bill 421, please.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, HB 421 by Representative Buckner, 130th to amend Code Section 485.7.4 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated related to ad valorem taxation treatment of bona fide conservation use property.
Chair recognizes Representative Buckner to present her bill, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 421 is designed to adjust the conservation use bill or amendment to the Constitution that was made in 1991. At that time, there was a cap of 2,000 acres put on this, and what this bill would do is remove the cap with increased ownership by private individuals and fewer companies and more interest in timber and forest products. It seems that this would be helpful to keep more trees growing in Georgia.
I have a quick question. Are you finished? Was that finished?
You said be quick.
We had a bill before a subcommittee this morning that was in this exact same section and had to do with a recent holding in a case in Chatham County about the 2,000 acres and the personal farm definition of that and various proportions that go with us. Would this alter that since we've had this recent holding? Do you know?
In the definition of who would get the
yes, ma'am.
The easement, it does change it, and it says any person engaged in the production of timber, and according to Legislative Council, in a code section, any person could mean a company, a person, an individual, or corporation. So it could be anybody that's growing timber.
Okay. Chair recognizes Chairman Lewis.
Now, did I understand you right? This would also include timber companies that own large tracts?
Person would mean corporations or individual families. So it'd be everybody.
Thank you.
Further questions for the author? Chair hears none. We're going to assign this one to our ad valorem sales subcommittee, ad valorem tax subcommittee. While you're up there, Mr. Secretary, would you read House Resolution 244, please?
House Bill 244 versus third session amendment to the Constitution so as to remove the acreage restriction on bona fide conservation use property for purposes of current use taxation.
Chair recognizes the lady from the 130th to summarize House Resolution 244.
That is a companion resolution, so that if the changes, if the bill passes, then it would have to be approved by the people of the state of Georgia, and that resolution would just allow for that.
Questions for the author? Seeing none, we'll assign that also to the ad valorem tax subcommittee. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Secretary, House Bill 481, please.
HB 481 by Representative Lindsay of the 54th to amend Article 1, Chapter 8 of Title 48 of Official Code of Georgia annotated related to sales and use taxation and taxes imposed on sales and to construction of certain tourist attraction facilities.
Is Representative Lindsay present? We'll suspend action on House Bill 481 until the author thinks it's important enough to show up. House Bill 405.
HB 405, Representative Martin of the 47th to amend Chapter 7, Title 48 of Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to income taxes and tax credits for qualified low-income buildings.
Chair recognizes Representative Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Which number 12 there?
Yes, sir.
Let's try it again.
Yes, sir.
Can you hear me now?
Wherever I put it, Mr. Chairman, it seems to want to point in the other direction. I don't know if that says anything about what kind of day I'm going to have. Am I on?
Yes, sir.
So to speak. Mr. Chairman, I bring to you today House Bill 45 LC 1495-83. request the Chair's consideration to assign this to subcommittee. Basically, what we're trying to do here is put in place a process whereby state tax credits that are currently in place in regards to these types of housing developments, rather than being allocated to the investors, would be sold or transferred to them. Under the current system, my understanding is if they're allocated, some of these types of costs that are incurred in coming by those credits are not deducted federally, and therefore the tax credits aren't as valuable to an investor. And since that is the case, it's not as attractive for folks to invest in the state of Georgia on these low-income tax credits. My understanding is that this bill does not have a negative fiscal impact, since most of the state tax credits issued under this code sections are being used today, and making them more eligible and more transferable would in fact create a taxable transaction, could in fact create a taxable transaction and create additional revenues for the state. Basically, this would benefit the recipients of these tax credits on their federal return and make them more transferable within the state of Georgia. Ask the Chair's consideration to assign this to subcommittee for discussion.
Thank you, Chairman Martin. Any questions for the author of House Bill, actually 405? Seeing none, we'll assign that to the Income Tax Subcommittee. Mr. Secretary, House Bill 435, second one in the Martin package for today.
HB 435, Representative Martin. 47 to amend Article 2, Chapter 7, Title 48, Official Code of Georgia, annotated relating to imposition rate and computation of income tax and to income tax credits for certain qualified business investments.
Chair recognizes Representative Martin, House Bill 435.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I bring to you today House Bill 435. We've entitled and refer to this as the Angel Investor Tax Credit Program. And honestly, Mr. Chairman, I am bringing this in conjunction with one of our colleagues across the hall, Senator Judson Hill, who cannot start this legislation in the Senate, so I've been working with him on it. But basically what this legislation seeks to do is create a tax credit program to bring more investment into Georgia for startup companies. Right now, the Georgia Research Alliance, we start a lot of companies in Georgia, but when that seed capital is necessary, many times those ideas and that intellectual property that we have fostered through the research environment in Georgia, we lose to other states that have more aggressive programs for allowing for investment capital to be advantageous to put it in more high-risk investments. So this seeks to have a conversation about how we can do that. I would sit here today and tell you that it allows for a tax credit up to $500,000 per investor over a 3-year period for monies invested into high tech on a dollar-for-dollar basis. And honestly, that is a pretty rich credit, and I think it's going to deserve some discussion as the bill moves forward. But it is also very worthy for us to try to keep that intellectual property in the state of Georgia, and would ask the Chair's consideration to assign this to subcommittee so that we can work it through the process.
Any questions for the author of House Bill 435, which he's just explained? Seeing none, we'll assign that to the Income Tax Subcommittee. Mr. Secretary, House Bill 437, please.
HB 437, Representative Martin, the 47th, to amend Article 2 of Chapter 7, Title 48, Official Code of Georgia, annotated relating to imposition, computation of income taxes and certain qualified low-income community investments in long-term debt securities.
Chair recognizes Representative Martin, 47.
Mr. Chairman, I thank you again. Thank the committee for their time. What we seek to do here with House Bill 437 is to take advantage, have Georgia take advantage of a federal program that was implemented in 2000 to attract investments through the community development entity to basically create an environment so we can attract some of that, I believe it's $17 billion that's available nationwide, to bring the opportunity for those investors to make use of that and develop low income and affordable housing in both urban and rural areas in the state of Georgia. That's the Chair's consideration to assign this to subcommittee for discussion.
Any questions? We'll assign that also to the Income Tax Subcommittee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Was that 437? Okay. That concludes, I believe, our first readers. Is anybody here else for a first reader that I've overlooked mistakenly. Oh. Okay. Mr. Secretary, House Bill 148.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 148, committee substitute, to amend Code Section 4883 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to exemptions from sales and use tax.
Chair recognizes distinguished Speaker Pro Tem, Representative Burkhalter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I bring to you today House Bill 148. Pretty simple proposition, but what it does is give a sales tax break. It actually extends the sales tax break that this legislature gave to the Georgia Aquarium when it was built. As you all know, the Georgia Aquarium is probably the largest single gift to this state and to our city, and its impact on the economy, not only through the creation of jobs, but through the creation of revenues, state and local, through hotel visits, restaurants, admissions, has been exponential to our state. They are getting ready to expand the aquarium. It's some 550,000 square feet now. The estimates that for the expansion are going to be maybe another 150,000 square feet. As you probably know, it's the largest aquarium in the world, not just in gallons, but in the number of fish species that are there. It has genuinely made our state a destination location, and as the major benefactor, Bernie Marcus, his goal was to try to get people to, when they come to Georgia, to stay at least another night and visit this attraction, and it certainly has done that and more. Their plans are to expand it soon, and like I say, it's already the world's largest, but we believe this expansion will be a great benefit to the state. And it's just on the construction materials, the sales tax break for the expansion, as we gave it to them when they built the original $300 million aquarium.
My recollection is I thought I saw in the news within the first month of it being open already 1 million visitors or something like that.
Well, they about a year and 4 months they've been open now, and they've had 4.2 million visitors, which is beyond anybody's expectations.
It's about $6.5 million in sales tax alone. I think that's a pretty good investment. I commend the gentleman.
Yeah, and they think some 1,500 jobs have been created from it, and additional jobs will be created from this.
Any questions for the author? Seeing none, what's the pleasure of the committee?
So moved.
Got a motion and a second. Motion due pass second. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, like sign. Motion carries. We'll get this hopefully into rules this afternoon if it stays open. Mr. Chairman of the Sales Tax Subcommittee, Chairman Lewis, do you have a report on House Bill 193 for the committee, please?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Your sales tax subcommittee met on House Bill 193, LC 1862. And we gave it a due pass recommendation by committee substitute.
Mr. Speaker Pro Tem.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. What this bill does is very simply extend the sunset on the sales tax cap on jet fuel. Very specifically, this does benefit Delta Airlines. I think one of the biggest myths that we have going right now in all our celebration of successfully fending off the unsolicited bid by U.S. Airways of Delta is that they're not out of the bankruptcy process yet, but they're certainly a very successful plan right now. They're following it, expecting to turn a profit, hopefully by year end. But you've heard it before. The largest single employer of this state, the very reason we're a gateway city to the world, and we've grown like we have, and we've enjoyed the growth in our state over the last 20 years. I think is more due to Delta Airlines than any other factor. They buy a lot of jet fuel, as you can imagine, and it's now the single largest or second largest expense item that the airline has to operate. As you know, the airline industry is very unpredictable. The price of jet fuel is even more unpredictable. And what we're trying to do, as we did previously when we passed this legislation, is to give our hometown airline some degree of predictability over one item that they purchase an awful lot of here in Georgia, jet fuel. as they navigate their way through bankruptcy and become profitable.
I understand also many home office statuses of other airlines don't have any sales tax on jet fuels. Typically,
That's
one
good.
of the things that
Excellent point, Mr. Chairman.
they offer to lure them there.
Yeah, I mean, we're actually unique in some respects. Most states that have a major airline hub or an airline domiciled in their state exempt entirely or have a very, very small cap on the amount of sales tax that they charge on the purchase of jet fuel for that airline. This cap, just so you know, just put it in numbers, is $15 million, the cap to the state that they pay in any given year. This is, as we did when fuel spiked in the aftermath of Katrina at the pump, we decided that it wasn't right for the state to get a windfall at the benefit of the consumer, or at the cost of the consumer, when we have a commodity that's so unpredictable.
Well, I think I speak for the whole committee when we say how proud we are to be even a small part of whatever we need to do to keep this wonderful corporate citizen in our state. We certainly appreciate all that they have meant to the state of Georgia, and especially the metropolitan area. Any questions for the author of the legislation? Hearing none, what's the pleasure of the committee? Got a motion do pass and a second. Any by substitute. Do we have any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, like sign. The motion carries. We'll have it in Rule 6. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Okay. What subcommittee is that? Chairman of the Sales Tax Committee, do you have a report for this committee on House Bill 186?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Your Sales Tax Committee met on House Bill 186, 149649S, and we recommend it to the full committee with a do pass recommendation by committee substitute.
Chairman recognizes the governor's floor leader, Representative Jim Cole, to present his bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I, and on behalf of the governor, thank you for your time and bringing before you House Bill 186. HB 186 is a sales tax exemption for biofuel production facilities. The governor proposes to provide an incentive for the construction of alternative fuel production facilities in Georgia based on Georgia-grown products. The proposal includes a sales and use tax exemption for materials and equipment used in the construction of biofuel production facilities that are dedicated to the production and processing of certain biofuels, ethanol, biodiesel, butanol, and intended to be derived from Georgia-grown agricultural products and biomass. As we know, demand for biofuels is expected to increase due to the combination of factors, which includes the ramping up of production of alternative fuel vehicles by our major manufacturers. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Any questions for the author of this legislation? 12. Chair recognizes Representative Martin.
To the gentleman yield for a question, or I guess a friendly question. Isn't it true we talked about this in subcommittee, and just real briefly before the whole committee, could you give them an outline of what the economic potential for this project is to that area in Georgia? I know it was
right.
Rather impressive.
This particular bill will, is designed to really kickstart a certain area of agricultural products that we in Georgia have a lot of, and which is biomass. And as recently you heard, Range Fuels has decided to locate in Soperton, Georgia. Their initial investment in Soperton and Truitland County is going to be $225 million for the construction of the facility, which will in turn create 70 jobs. But indirectly, it'll create over 200 construction jobs, and then also indirectly about 100 jobs related to the shipping, transportation of goods to this facility. Department of Economic Development did a rough estimate that they're estimating that this total project will have about a $650 million impact on that region.
Wow. Any other questions? 26, who's that? You recognize it?
Thank you, Representative Cole. Does this still allow, say, somebody that produces other types of fuel who want to get into this as well, does this allow them to benefit from that as well? If they have a current facility, it talks about new facilities, but if they have an existing facility and they decide they want to get into this line of business as well, could they benefit?
Now, if they have an existing facility and want to get into current biofuel production.
Right.
This only covers new construction. Currently, there is a sales tax exemption for equipment used in production of biofuels. This only covers the construction materials, and it would start July 1st of 07. So if someone currently has a facility that's already built and they decide to get into this, they could take advantage of the current exemption for the equipment, but not the construction materials.
So they would have to purchase a new site somewhere else in order to do that. They couldn't, I guess, add a line onto their existing facility in a sense, or expand their current operation.
I believe, we're going to defer a lot to the Department of Revenue on that. If there is a current facility, they decide to expand that into another type of production, that could fall under rules and regulations that would allow that exemption, as long as it was designated towards production of ethanol or biomass, biofuel, and it was intended to be from Georgia-grown products.
It would seem to me that if we're trying to promote this type of fuel, which I think is a great idea, then maybe those that are already in the business that have the ability and the capital and the interest to expand their current operations might be able to benefit from it as well. So I hope that's the case, and not just somebody that has to buy new property and start up from scratch.
Point well taken.
24, is that Chairman Parson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to ask, isn't there a federal subsidy on each gallon of ethanol that's produced? And there's some kind of federal subsidy that's something like 50 cents a gallon or something like that?
I have to say I don't know.
Okay, I didn't know if you knew or not. That's why I was asking.
Mr. Roy,
okay, there is. Thank you.
Chair recognizes 29. Is that you? Representative Tubman?
Representative Kelly, just an administrative question. Will this extend to, does the facility have to buy it to get the credit, or will a contractor or a subcontractor receive the credit? The sales tax exemption?
I'm sorry, we repeat that.
To qualify for the exemption, do you have to be, is it only extended to the facility, or is it extended to a contractor or a subcontractor?
I believe it, whoever, let me check the bill. It says in section, any person making a sale of tangible personal property for the purpose specified in this paragraph. So anybody selling property to whoever is constructing this, there will have to be a certificate provided to them saying that they offered a sales tax exemption. So I assume that someone purchasing equipment, would the owners or capital investor and people making a capital investor in this would provide that sales tax exemption for them. I guess a general contractor type situation.
Chair recognizes Representative Peake.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the distinguished floor leader of the governor and distinguished colleague of mine from Monroe County next to me, is it not true that that is a pink tie you're wearing today?
And first of all, when you started, distinguished is a very high term that I've never aspired or reached, but it is a very pink tie. And,
no further questions, Mr.
Chairman. You had to be comfortable in yourself to wear pink.
Yeah. Any serious questions for the author of this legislation? Seeing no more questions, what's the pleasure of the committee?
Move to pass.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? By substitute, actually.
Yes,
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, like sign. Motion carries. We'll put it to rules today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, members.
Chairman Lewis, do you have a report to the full committee for House Bill 219?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. This subcommittee on sales tax matters regarding House Bill 219, LC number 149654S. We recommend it do pass to the full committee by committee substitute.
Chair recognizes Chairman of Ad Valorem Subcommittee and Chairman of Oversight Committee, Representative Royal, present his bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen of the committee.
The substitute House Bill 219 amends the Georgia Higher Education Savings Plan. What it does is it simply removes a $100,000 cap on the income from the participants. Georgia is one of 34 states who...
Representative Royal, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I think 219, you might have your bills crossed up there.
I've got... Please excuse me.
Sorry.
This is a motor fuel.
Right.
Okay.
My apologies. I read the number wrong. I misled you. I'm sorry. 219 is what I recognize you for.
For the past 2 years, we have been collecting motor fuel tax, the state portion, at the distributor level. We did not elect at the time that we passed the legislation, original legislation, to collect the local 2 or 3%, whichever it were, on motor fuels. So this bill simply brings the local portion in to the same type of collection. It'll be collected as a sales tax. The original tax is, if the last numbers I saw, I think the revenue collections have been increased over 50% on the state's portion of motor fuel tax. We feel like the same thing will happen on local motor fuels tax, and it will ensure that a lot of the convenience stores out there that are selling fuels, the sales tax will be collected and returned to the state and local governments. Be glad to try to answer any questions.
As I recall, Mr. Chairman, when we changed that collection at the wholesale level for the state tax, it was millions of dollars difference on the same volume than what we had experienced when it was all the way out.
That's correct. That's correct.
And this is going to do the same thing for our local communities, our counties, I guess, and collecting their taxes and so forth.
That's correct. The Georgia Oilmen's Association helped draft this legislation. The Department of Revenue also helped draft the legislation, and both of them are on board.
I want to publicly, on behalf of this committee and this General Assembly, thank both the Georgia Oilmen's Association and our Revenue Department. Commissioner Graham, I think, is with us today. I know for a fact and saw myself many late night hours in working out a lot of compromises and a lot of good changes to the beginning to make this really good legislation to benefit the local governments and the local areas that will certainly benefit from the instantaneous now collection of taxes that are due. I certainly want to thank them. I see them in the audience, and we're very grateful to you all, as our local government, I'm sure, would tell you as well. Any other question for the author of this legislation? 29, is that Representative Tumlin?
Mr. Royal, page 2, line 11, the duty then is solely on the purchaser as to the proper jurisdiction, not on the seller.
Would you repeat that, please? I can't hear you.
Okay. On page 2, line 11, it says the seller may rely upon the representation by the purchaser, so the duty to properly report this is purely on the purchaser, not on the seller. As to what county, I guess it would be accountable to.
Yes, sir. The representation is made by the purchaser, and he has to verify which jurisdiction it's being delivered to.
Thank you.
Other questions, and I certainly commend the gentleman that obviously this is very technical legislation, because you've got a whole new accounting system and potentially some pretty great expense in adapting computer systems and so forth, all of which have gone into this formula, again, for the greater good of our local governments. I just want to make sure that's recognized throughout. It's outstanding legislation, in my opinion. Other questions? Seeing none, what's the pleasure of the committee?
Second.
We've got a motion and a second. Do pass. Any further discussion? Do pass by committee sub. Any further discussion? Seeing none, what's the pleasure? All in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Chairman Royal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
What's the other one he's got? That's the only one he had, right? Oh, here. Yeah, while you're there, why don't you just stay there? Do we have a report from Chairman Scott from the Income Tax Subcommittee, please? on House Bill 225.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, your subcommittee on income tax met on 22207 and gave a due pass recommendation to HB 225 LC 186064.
Chairman Royal, let me recognize you for the right bill this time. My
Okay.
apologies. House Bill 225, please.
I'm not so sure you were at fault anyway. We'll try it again. This deals or amends the Georgia Higher Education Savings Plan. All 50 states have some form or version of a savings plan. 43 states levy a state income tax, and only 32 of those offer some type of contribution benefit for that. This simply removes a $100,000 income cap so that parents at incomes, we know that 7.82% of the state income tax returns only 7.82% or over $100,000. This isn't going to be a rich man's legislative bill. It allows grandparents to enter into this and get benefits also at $2,000 maximum cap for an income tax deduction. And this legislation was brought to me by the Office of the Treasury, and if you'll notice that Mr. Golick, the governor's floor leader, signed second on the bill, so we have support of the administration and the leadership.
Did you say that hoping someday to become one of those wonderful statuses in life, do you say this includes grandparents?
Grandparents may, with this legislation, may invest in this, yes, sir. They can invest now, but they can't receive the $2,000 deduction, so they will be able to receive that also.
Wow. Any questions for the author of this legislation? Do we have any grandparents on the committee here?
Oh, yeah.
I would think a granddad would want to at least ask a question.
I need a payroll.
Do you? I don't see any questions. What's the pleasure of the committee? I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion do pass House Bill 225. Signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Passes unanimously. Thank you,
Mr. Chairman. I forgot one other thing. Georgia is the only state that recognized a cap limitation in this type of legislation.
Thank you. Chairman Parsons, House Bill 374. Do you have a report to the full committee?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Chairman O'Neill, your subcommittee on public finance and policy, I don't know if I'm on here or not.
We're about, what number, sorry?
It's
24.
My apologies. Now you are.
Chairman O'Neill, your subcommittee on public policy, public finance and policy met and took under consideration House Bill 374, that's version Legislative Council 186233, and voted to approve that with a due pass recommendation to the full committee. And I've got a notation here with structured rule. I don't recall that, but apparently that's something.
I'm not sure we can do that under the rules, but I'm sure that will happen in the Rules Committee. Chair recognizes the Chairman of Banking, Representative James Mills, to present his bill, please.
Okay, if I present it from here.
Yes, sir. If you so desire.
All right, House Bill 374 is a bill that doesn't change any of our current law. So if you like the way things are currently written in regard to the hotel motel tax, I would hope you would not be in opposition to this. This is somewhat of a byproduct of over the interim studying some clarifications that we can make regarding our tax code. In specifics to the hotel motel tax, there's about 20-something different codes that define how the hotel motel tax is defined, and by moving the funding portion and some other definitions up toward the top of the code section, we think this will help some of our local attorneys have better clarification when deciding how this hotel motel tax should be distributed. GMA has taken a look at this. They're in agreement with what we're doing. ACCG has taken a look at this as well, and they're in agreement. Tourism Alliance and the hotel groups have taken a look. They still see further need for change down the road, but they feel like this is a good step in the right direction.
Thank you, Chairman Mills. Are there any questions for the author of this legislation? Obviously impressive to me just who all agrees to it at one time. I mean, I don't see any questions. What's the pleasure of the committee?
Move to pass.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Carries unanimously. We'll report it to rules. Thank you, Chairman Mills.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee.
Chairman Lewis, House Bill 264. Do you have a report to the full committee?
Yes, sir. Subcommittee on Sales Tax now regarding House Bill 264, OC number 186148, and we give it a due pass recommendation to the full committee.
Thank you, Chairman Lewis. The chair recognizes the gentleman from the 79th, Representative Fran Millar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First of all, as a grandfather of four, thank you, Mr. Royal, for that bill. Secondly, I'd like to thank Chairman Lewis, Chairman Martin. We had 2 hearings in subcommittee on this bill, and basically what it does, it deals with the homestead option sales tax. There's only 2 counties this affects, are DeKalb and Rockdale, and this bill was given to Representative Robert Mumford in Rockdale. He ran it by their city and their county attorney, and they're fine with the bill. And what it does basically is provides for the distribution of host revenues to a proposed city of Dunwoody that really equals the amount that they get right now in an unincorporated area. It doesn't change anything from that perspective, and it just, if the city of Dunwoody happens, it allows them to get the money. It would flow directly to them from the state versus coming through DeKalb County. And fortunately, Dr. Paula Yeary, who's come to a couple of hearings for me, and I greatly appreciate it, from the University of Georgia, she did all the calculations on this bill. And also, her calculations were checked by another colleague over at the Carl Vinson Institute, and as to their accuracy, and they concurred. And that's basically what the bill does. If it's no changes from the revenues that will flow to the city of Dunwoody versus if we remain unincorporated. It represents about $1.6 million, according to her calculations. That's the bill, sir.
16, who's that? Chair recognizes Representative Teague.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Is that microphone on? There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a city that legislation is going through right now in Fulton County. So this wouldn't apply. We wouldn't be able to use the same piece to do it.
No, ma'am, this does not apply to Fulton County. Just DeKalb and Rockdale have the homestead option sales tax right now. So it's not applicable to any other counties but those 2. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. This is for a city that's not in existence right
That's
now.
correct.
Right?
It's a proposed city.
Okay. Would you like to extend this to a proposed city?
I think you probably need to talk to members of the Fulton delegation before I do that, before you would do that. You don't have a homestead option sales tax, so I don't think you can do this. And the expert's sitting there nodding his head, telling me that accordingly. So it just can't be done in Fulton County.
It can't be done in Fulton County?
As of, well, under present law.
We're changing the law for this, right?
We're changing how the host taxes would be distributed, okay, if Dunwoody becomes a city. But this bill is only applicable to DeKalb. We can't do it for Fulton County. I'm sorry. Try to help you some other way, but I can't help you with this one.
Okay.
Is the lady concluded?
Oh, I'm finished. I'm sorry.
Okay. Chair recognizes Representative Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have to, I guess, try to do this in the form of a question. Y'all get something before the committee at the right time if we have a discussion on the motion. But isn't it true to the gentleman presenting the bill that I have a document here from DeKalb County, I don't know if you have a copy of it, and that document is expressing their disagreement to the formula, and we discussed this in the second subcommittee, did we not?
Yes, sir.
Isn't it further true that at that subcommittee, the gentleman from DeKalb, while they agreed, they said they did not agree with the bill and the calculation, also represented that they had not had time to look at the calculation. He said that at the subcommittee meeting. Is that not correct?
That is also true.
Didn't I ask you at that subcommittee meeting if the calculation wasn't the same as this House passed last year?
That's correct.
And your answer to me in subcommittee was...
It's essentially the same. That's correct.
And didn't we not give everyone the opportunity to question the expert from the University of Georgia, the PhD that came to discuss the formula in the first subcommittee meeting, and nobody questioned that formula at that time?
That's correct.
Thank you.
I didn't realize you'd gone to law school overnight. Chair recognizes...
My chairman.
Chair recognizes Chairman Williams.
Might be me, Mr.
Oh,
Chairman.
I'm sorry, Chairman
24.
Parsons. 24, yes, sir. My apologies.
Thank you, Chairman. I wanted to ask, I'm not sure I understand this. Did you say that the money, without this bill, the money could still flow to a new city of Dunwoody, but it would flow through DeKalb County? Is that correct, or am I incorrect?
Now, what happens? You're creating a new municipality as a qualified municipality.
Right.
So what happens? The money, rather than going directly from the state, the rest of the money goes to DeKalb. This would go right to DeKalb as a new municipality. Okay, that's how it would flow. And what we're trying to do, let me explain a little bit here why we're trying to do this through legislation. When this was first passed, there was intergovernmental agreements between all the cities of DeKalb and DeKalb County. They've been in litigation for 7 years because DeKalb County is not paying the cities the way they felt they should be paid. We don't want to go through that litigation. So we're trying to spell it out in advance so we don't have to go through that hassle. That's the bottom line.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Lark, do you know if, I mean, there's other cities in DeKalb County, right?
Correct.
If this formula were applied to other cities, would the distributions change dramatically or not? Or?
According to Dr. Urian, what she's tried to do is model it after what people thought they were getting in the intergovernmental agreement from 7 years ago. And and they've been in court ever since. This codifies it, so it has to be this way. We get the money directly in the city of Dunwoody. It doesn't go through DeKalb's coffers anymore.
And what if, second question, what if Dunwoody doesn't happen?
If Dunwoody doesn't happen, this bill won't go anywhere in the Senate. And this bill has to start in the House because it's a revenue bill. It has to be passed by the 30th day. And I'll kill the bill in the Senate at that point in time if the city of Dunwoody does not happen. We have the 2 Senate bills over here right now, which, according to the Speaker, the hearings will be held on those bills.
But by the definitions, the bill really has no effect in law because it would only apply to a city created after January 1st, 2007 that's also in a host county,
correct.
Right? So
that's correct.
Unless there are any other cities, potential cities in DeKalb County we haven't heard about in incubation, this would be solely...
which I anticipate none at this point in time.
Is it clear, third and last question from me at least, is it clear to you what the geographic perimeter of Dunwoody is?
Yes, sir.
Has that been agreed to?
I've lived in Dunwoody for 27 years, and according to the Dunwoody homeowners, and that's basically the definition used by the boundaries that have been proposed in the Senate bill, are 285 on your southern border. On the western border would be the perimeter mall area where DeKalb County and Fulton County meet. North, it would be Dunwoody Club Drive. Wendell Willard lives on the wrong side of Dunwoody Club. He's in the Fulton County part. I live on the right side, the DeKalb side, and they're just on the Gwinnett border on the other side. It's almost a perfect rectangle. And that has not changed since I've lived in Dunwoody for the last 27 years. And that's the boundaries that have been adopted in the proposed legislation.
Any further questions of the author of this legislation? For the author by any committee member? Seeing none, what's the pleasure of the committee? I have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Hearing no request, therefore, all in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much.
Oh, good. All right, we have, Mr. Secretary, would you read House Bill 481, please?
HB 481 by Representative Lindsay at 54, amend Article 1, Chapter 8, Title 48, Fiscal Code of Georgia annotated relating to sales and use taxation imposed on sales to and in construction of certain tourist attraction facilities.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Fulton to give us a brief overview as the first reader of which
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize.
481.
You're already sharing another subcommittee, doing another bill. I appreciate the opportunity to do the first reading today. The bill, the best way to explain it is that it asks for similar treatment to what is going to be before the House shortly, dealing with the aquarium. This is a small museum and monument that's being built in what's the Atlantic Station area of Midtown Atlanta, called Millennium Gate. It's being proposed by the National Monuments Foundation. It's both a monument and a small museum dealing with the history of philanthropy in Atlanta. I believe that it'll fill a vital function in terms of allowing the city of Atlanta to reach back to its past and to also move forward into the future. We have constructed the proposed sales tax protections in a way similar to what's been done with sports arenas. Out of an abundance of caution, quite frankly, we think it's a good way to do this on other similar projects in the future, in that the museum has to prove itself before it could take advantage of any kind of credit backs to the state. In terms of what happens, is that it will have to pay, in terms of its construction, the sales taxes as part of the construction. But if it actually does what it says it's going to do over the next 5 years, it can, in terms of what it projects in terms of its sales tax generated for the city and for the state, it will be able to get credit back on that in the future, applied against those future sales taxes, if it indeed does what it says it's going to do over a 5-year period. It's projected that the sales tax savings to the museum and the society will be about $800,000. And like I said, it doesn't get a dime if it doesn't actually build it, if it doesn't actually generate new sales tax revenues for the state. And that's it in a nutshell.
Thank you, Representative.
And I've passed along, going both ways, and I apologize. We're supposed to get one for everybody, and I'll be happy, before we get to the subcommittee, to have one. This is a little explanation brochure from Millennium Gate, and I'll make sure that we get a copy for everyone before the bill goes any further forward.
Chair recognizes Chairman Parsons.
Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, I'm looking at the handout you have here.
Yes, sir.
And there's a quote in here by Mayor Shirley Franklin. Did I understand you to say that the city of Atlanta would decide the content and the direction of the museum?
No, absolutely not. This is a private foundation. Mayor Franklin is one of the people that is solicited in terms of support, but as well as a lot of dignitaries from the city of Atlanta.
Okay,
this is a private foundation. This is set up by the National Monuments Foundation.
Okay. When I read the street names in the city of Atlanta,
yeah,
I see they have a different idea of the history than maybe I would. So, thank you.
Well, we hope to embrace both your ideals and others as well. We want to make this a large, inclusive as possible.
Representative Lindsay,
yes, sir.
I noticed that the period of time that must expire prior to the request for the refund is 5 years, as I read the legislation.
Yes, sir. They've got to either meet their goals and do what they say within 5 years, or they don't get the payback.
Assume with me for a second that they decide not to ask for it after 5 years until 8 years. How long are we going to have to, anticipate budgetarily the possibility of that hit against the budget?
Mr. Chairman, my anticipation, and we'll be happy to tighten it up further, is that they must meet it within 5 years and start to request the payback, or it's gone. And I'll be happy to tighten that up through the subcommittee process. It's not my intention to leave it open forever.
Okay. Well, we're excited about the potential of the legislation. We appreciate you bringing it. We're going to assign it to our sales tax subcommittee, and we look forward to a spirited debate. Thank you, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. The Chairman of Ad Valorem Tax Subcommittee, do you have a report to the full committee on House Bill 321?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
your subcommittee on ad valorem as a do pass for House Bill.
I'm sorry.
I had to do it.
321. Chair recognizes Chairman Royal of the 171st. If you would, please present to the committee House Bill 321. Is that in everybody's folder? Chairman Royal, we do not have that bill printed in everybody's folder.
Yes, sir.
Without objection, I will let you proceed. However, if there is objection, I hope maybe you can explain it well enough to where they...
I'll try to do that, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity. The legislation simply places in the statute a court decision in Chatham County concerning the CUVR of the Conservation Use Amendment. The court decision said that it was dealing with the beneficial interest ownership in the Conservation Use Covenant, which said that if there was a beneficial interest by a family member in a covenant that had 2,000 acres, that the percentage ownership would refer to the amount of acreage that is claimed. For example, if there was a family farm entity and it had 2,000 acres in a covenant, if one family member owned 33% of that family farm entity, then 660 acres would be the limitation or the maximum amount of acreage charged to that person. That person could go on and have the additional 1,400 or 1,340 acres in other family farm entities. It allows family farm entities to have more acreage. And this was a court case that was decided in Chatham County. And all this legislation does is mirror the court case. It's really not necessary. There were some entities that wanted it in its statute so there'd be no opportunity for confusion, but it mirrors the court case and it does not change anything other than the court decision.
We're trying to get this up and down the line, give everybody, it's a pretty short bill, trying to give them a chance to look at it. Are there any questions for the author?
What it has in effect, the court decision, is that it allows family farm entities to have more than 2,000 acres in a covenant when they have individual members owning different percentages in the family farm entity.
In other words, each member of a family now can own up to can have up to 2,000
That's correct.
acres.
Each member of the family farm entity can have up to 2,000 acres if their percentage ownership allows.
And how far down into descent are we talking? What constitutes a family? Do you recall? Is it children, grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren?
I think it's somebody help me. Is the third degree of civil reckoning is the way the original law. But it's well defined in the statute what a family farm entity is, and it involves trust and several different things. But all this does is confirm what the court rendered in its decision, and it was the appeals court that made the decision.
Do you think the court was changing the law in the decision, or do you think
I think the court changed the administration of the law. Before, if a family farm entity had a piece of property and they could enter up to 2,000 acres, period. Now this expands the eligibility for more acreage, yes, sir. So it changed the way it was being administered.
Okay. Representative Martin?
Wasn't there some finding in that case that this could be accomplished by dividing the farm individually as well, and the court held that they didn't, since it could be accomplished in another manner and the 2,000 acres could be gotten, that there was no reason to gate the process and make an artificial division of a family farm? Wasn't that one of the driving forces in it was alluded to in the court decision?
Any type of family farm, you could have family partnership, you could have individual ownership, so it applied to all of it, right? Any entity, any farming entity that is eligible for original acceptance into the covenant is eligible for this. It just expands the corporations, the family corporations, the entities up to more than 2,000 acres. Nobody can have more than 2,000 acres individually, though.
Representative Peake.
Mr. Chairman, to answer your question, it's within the fourth degree of civil record.
Okay.
Fourth degree?
Fourth degree.
Thank you. Representative Teague.
Mr. Chair, my question is just, are we getting ready to vote this out or something, out of committee to the rules or something?
We will take action on this bill if the committee so desires. I'm sorry, I couldn't.
Okay, no, I'm just saying, okay, without my having a copy of it, at least to look at it, that's fine.
We're happy to suspend action now and provide you with, we have one copy here, and we can make others quickly before we take any action and give everybody adequate time to review it. I don't want anybody to vote on any legislation they haven't had plenty of time to read and understand. While we're getting those, in the meantime, 29, is that Representative Tumlin?
Can you give me an example? If you own, with a non-family member, 50% of 2,000 acres, are you deemed to own 2,000 acres?
After this court decision, I think you can have twice that much. And, I think legislative counsel has read the court decision back there. Before I mislead you, I'd like for the legislative counsel to answer that question.
While they're doing it, I mean, what I was driving at, if you own it without a family member, you're deemed to own all of it. But if you have a family, you're part of a family business, you're only deemed to own.
If you own 50% of it, then I think that you can get an additional. But if you own 50%, you wouldn't have but 1,000 acres of it anyway. So it would allow you to accomplish another 1,000 acres.
Right.
Right. It's still a maximum of 2,000 acres per individual.
Did we have a question for legislative counsel in that? Do we know? Chair.
Sewell, have I spoken correctly?
I think you're correct, Mr. Chairman. I think the ultimate effect, as I understand it, is in essence, if you will disregard intermediate structure and just trace the beneficial interest after the individual ownership according to their percentage of ownership.
Yes, sir. That's what I thought.
Chair recognizes, is that Mills? 18. Chairman Mills.
So if I owned, a real-life example, if I owned 1,000 acres in the family, and there was 2,000 in the Land Conservation Use Act in the family, and if this bill were to pass, and I wanted to go buy another 1,000 acres, then I could put that 1,000 acres under the Land Conservation Act.
Well, what type of ownership are you talking about?
Family.
You have a family partnership?
I don't have the bill in front of me. Whatever the current law is now.
Well, it provides for all types of family entities.
I guess the end point I'm trying to get to is this going to affect, is there any fiscal effect on this long term? I mean,
well, the court's made the fiscal effect, and it is going to cost the county's additional ad valorem tax because it's expanding the way that the law is being administered. And the courts did that. This piece of legislation is not doing it. The courts did that.
Right.
Which, you still will have the opportunity to have a beneficial interest in 2,000 acres, period. Whether you own it in a family farm, partnership, corporation, or what. You can personally have a 2,000 acre limitation.
May I follow up?
Please.
Have there been any other rulings? I mean, this is the only ruling that's out there. I mean,
that's the only one I'm aware of, and that happened this past summer.
Representative Teague.
Okay, are you talking about 2,000 acres per person in the family, or just 2,000 acres total for everybody?
It depends on how the ownership is vested. An individual has a 2,000 acre limitation of vested ownership in the conservation use. In Fulton County, I doubt if there are very many CUVA covenants out there.
Okay.
It has to be farmland. It has to qualify as active production.
Okay, because I have Chattahoochee Hills country, and then I have the actual area where I live, where they are dividing up now to make subdivisions. But then there are areas where we have farmland So
No subdivisions may enter.
okay,
this.
but there was farmland. You understand what that? Like the Hendersons died,
Yeah.
the children split it up,
One-
but
one
then
of the
the area around it
One of the qualification is 80% of the income has to be derived
from
as farming income on the property. That's the income test to be eligible to enter into the covenant.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, I don't see, Chairman, Representative Martin, you have a question?
Well, I thought I was understanding where we were going here, but I just talked with the Legislative Council. My understanding of the court ruling is that it came about because a judge ruled constitutionally that the families were being treated unconstitutionally, I suppose, because family interests being held by people that weren't of age to hold real property, that were in partnership, couldn't receive the benefits. Is that not sort of what?
That's my understanding.
Yeah, I mean, I'm mumbling a bit here, but I think I understand that the family partnership had individuals in it that could not hold it fee simple because of their age, and they were not receiving their constitutional benefit that they should receive, and the only way to do so was to be able to allocate that proportionally, if there were a partnership in place, which they could in fact be involved in. That's my understanding of where the court case came from. Perhaps I'm incorrect.
I'm going to exercise the prerogative of the chair and move to adjourn the meeting and suspend action on this bill. I'm very uncomfortable with not having a copy of it in front of every member before we vote on it. It is very technical, and I'm sure it's good legislation. I'm sure it does come out of that case. I just would like everybody in the committee to have an opportunity to see that, and we'll take it up the very first item in our next full committee meeting next week.
Okay.
So I'm going to suspend hearing on this bill, and is there any further business to come before the committee? Hearing none, we stand adjourned. Thank you.